Hi, I'm Mark Montgomery. I'm founder and CEO of KYield. I recently published a paper on SPEAR AI systems, which stands for Safe, Productive, Efficient, Accurate, and Responsible AI Systems. And as I've done in the past few times, decided to do a video the companion to the paper and walk people through it. That has been actually popular when I've shared it in our newsletters. Get into the detail a little bit and describe it. So I'm going to share my screen here just with the actual paper, and we're going to walk through it. So it takes a while. I'll try to do it rapidly, but fair warning, I'm not the fastest in the world on this. These are complex topics and very important. So let's get started. Okay, so the chatbot revolution, LLM chatbots. The first part of this paper is primarily a review of the research. I spent several weeks updating a fresh review of the research on the problems with chatbots, and most of the research is on either problems or trying to get attention for new methods. And then after we go through that, we'll have a briefer section on the work, which is pretty extensive, on how to improve the problems in LLM chatbots and LLMs, large language models more generally. And then finally, at the end, I present our KOS, which is our KYield operating system that is 27 years in R&D. And the KOS is a prime example of a SPEAR AI system. So the abstract on this, by the way, the paper is on our website. I've posted links on LinkedIn and Twitter and in my Substack newsletter. So thousands of people, plus we've sent it out. So thousands of CXOs in large organizations have read this now already in the first few days. So basically what we have is a major revolution. We had the LL bots were unleashed prematurely, I believe, on the web to the general public. And the problem, most of the problems that we'll get into, is because of the interactivity. So when you make it available to everybody, this is not new. This has been well known for years, but these high risk models and algorithms, and we had some internally with our SGM. We voluntarily pulled it and actually pulled it from the USPTO, the patent office, because we didn't want to advertise and promote to state actors and terrorists, etc. Essentially, the problem is that any system that accelerates, and that's a big buzzword now, but it's true, you can accelerate discovery, right? And accelerate when you're talking about generalized LLM bots on any topic, you can accelerate work. And so that includes, unfortunately, weapons of mass destruction, and especially bioterrorism is my number one concern, and I've expressed it for years. And so that's what we have. That's a setup. It's the making it available. If it's in controlled labs, right, and you have tight security, it's not a problem. You can use it for drug development and that sort of thing. I mean, there's some copyright issues, but even that is much less of an issue if you talk to publishers like I have. The problem is that it's been made available to everyone. So this seems like democratization to people that are not experts in this, but actually it's extremely high risk. It's not democratization, it's ubiquitizing. And ubiquity is not the same as democracy. Democracy is a choice. You have governance systems surrounding it. You have constitutions. That is none of that, despite all the rhetoric, as you'll see, is possible with LLM chatbots. So this paper is primarily focused on the inefficiencies, risk, and limitations of LLMs, the biggest business and economic incentives influencing decisions, and the architecture that's required to provide Spear AI systems. So we have the popularity and media exposure. There's no question the functionality is very interesting about mimicry in LLM chatbots, and it does have the possibility for significant productivity improvements. But with that trade-off comes a massive amount of risks, not just to society, not just to democracy, which is all true, but also individual organizations. And that's and individuals. So that's what we're going to focus in on here. So the first thing is that I want to clear up is that the AI is now, because of the LLMs, has become synonymous with AI. LLMs and AI are seen as the same now, thanks primarily to media and the hype engine. But that's false. There's a lot of different methods within the AI umbrella, not just LLMs. LLMs, natural language processing, I've been studying it for over 20 years. LLMs have been around for a long time. There's been all kinds of different algorithms over the years. They're very interesting. What makes this different, really, frankly, is that Microsoft enabled, with its infrastructure and investment, the continuation of ChatGPT, and that triggered an arms race because everybody else didn't want to be left behind. So I think that was one of the most irresponsible, reckless moves, not just in Microsoft history, but in the commercialization of technology in history. Even the nuclear weapons was more carefully managed than that. And I was a supporter of Microsoft from 1982 through 1996. We hosted product boot camps for them in what was called the Learning End by the head of research at Microsoft 30 years later. And some of the early people, especially Russell Borland, was a very good friend of mine. He was my early partner in KYield and other ventures. And so this, I don't want people to get the wrong idea here. I was one of the strong boosters of Microsoft investors and customers in the early years. But look, when they make mistakes, I'm a straight shooter. I'm going to tell you. And this was a colossal error, despite I know it added hundreds of billions of dollars to their market cap and all the rest of it. So let's get moving here. The 70 years of AI research on top of the shoulders of giants. We have the strategic, that's one of the themes about this is the investment in the back end. LLMs are primarily strategic to big tech, and especially, NVIDIA, of course, and chips. Yes, that's true. And other chip makers are becoming a lot more active in it. But it's primarily the cloud service providers because it requires so much scale and so much expense. They're the only ones that could do it at the massive scales at the consumer chatbot level, right? Unless somebody wanted to, stand up an enormous investment. Others could do it. Others are trying to do it, but they're the ones that had the capacity, and that's why Microsoft presumably, got behind it, is because it's a very strategic to their, and of course it was an exclusive agreement, which is now under investigation by antitrust officials. So I talk about a couple of the examples of the strategic investments that have been made. Nothing wrong with strategic investments. In fact, it's a requirement. I fully support it. The problem is when the strategic investments trigger an arms race that's bad for society, that contains things like catastrophic risk, economic collapse is one of the risks that we'll talk about here. I'm not going to support that. I'm sorry. My friends in the industry, you're wrong. And I'm going to tell you you're wrong. And I have a very good track record of being right about these things. I was also a very early supporter of Google, among others. So we have this strategic entanglement, let's call it, from big tech that has been investing in these large language models. I'm going to say 90% of the R&D in all of AI something like that, has been directed towards the strategic interests of 3 or 4 companies. You know, 5 or 6 companies now, but for many years it was primarily the big, the 3 or 4 big techs investing in this. They tried to corner the labor market by hiring all of the good scientists and talent. They had some success in that for a long time. They invested, and this goes back with Google for that I know for 20 years. Google was actually the leader in high scale big data science. And it was very impressive. I mean, it really was. They did a really good job in getting much more efficient on search and more accurate from huge quantities of data on the web that was unstructured, right? And so they did a really interesting job about that. And of course, it made an extremely valuable company. But those strategic interests are no longer aligned with customers or society. And that's the problem, right? And governments still haven't done anything and presume about the current risk, presumably because of misinformation, perhaps a little bit of political influence and corruption, I suspect, but primarily it's this DC's false perception that that LLMs are somehow connected to America's future, that there's a national security benefit from allowing these things to continue. As I say in this report, in this paper, and elsewhere, the administration should have shut down ChatGPT within hours because of the risk. That's how high risk this is. You're talking about bioterrorism within hours. I mean, look, once you learn how to prompt these things, right? And the safeguards, so-called safeguards, is also another misnomer. It's a false equivalent, especially when they try to call them guardrails. That implies a physical barrier. We're talking about text. There is essentially an infinite amount of ways to get around these so-called guardrails or safeguards, and that's been proven. And I give citations. I have over 50 papers cited, and some of those are studies giving the test results. Very easy to work around these things. Once you learn how to become an expert in prompt engineering, and you can do these workarounds, then you can basically go after anything you want. So to give you an example that I've used is that within seconds you can get a return on something like bioterrorism and how to build a bioweapon. And it's not something that needs to even be that explicit. You can make it look to be like it's a legitimate scientific inquiry, right? Somebody that's just doing their job, and they're trying to. So you're using, let's say, a certain chemical or a drug, and you can make it look and even sound like you're falsely that you're working for a pharma company in R&D with the prompt, and even the safeguards that they have won't pick it up. So it's very easy to work around these things. It's essentially inherently risky, and it's impossible to make safe. That's the bottom line. That's going to be the message of this after you read this paper. It says some of the sites that I posted, 50 minutes to read through this paper. So this is the safety and security problems. We've got this, and here I'll just read this quote from one of the papers that's cited in this. We find that jailbreak prompts are introducing more creative attack strategies and disseminating more stealthily over time, which poses significant challenges to their proactive detection. Moreover, we find LLMs and safeguards cannot effectively defend against jailbreak prompts in various scenarios. Particularly, we identify 2 highly effective jailbreak prompts which achieve 0.99 attack success rate on ChatGPT. This is 3.5 and GPT-4, and they have persisted online for over 100 days. So in other words, they tested this nearly 100, nearly 100% success rate, and they left it, and it's been up for over 100 days when they wrote this paper. So if you're a terrorist group, a religious cult, that one of which we've had, by the way, these have been national security risks. If you research it like I've had, we've actually had cults whose primary mission is extinction of the human race, and some of them are criminally insane but brilliant people. And similarly with the terrorist groups, and then there's state sponsors that can try and direct these attacks towards their state interests. So catastrophic risk, we've all heard about this in the doomers and all that. Look, this is not about being a doomer or forget that whole argument about, accelerator, deceleration, and all that nonsense. That's just hyperbole. I'm a straight shooter. I have a very good track record on forecasting, and I've studied catastrophic risk for decades, right? And so the DoD asked me, very senior thought leaders, PhDs in the DoD asked me to help out after 9/11. I was a volunteer in the Katrina disaster. I worked with BP trying to provide a solution that would prevent the Gulf oil spill. I've worked on a lot of major catastrophes, right? And studied these, and with a particular focus on how to prevent them using artificial intelligence. And if you do it right, you can use AI to prevent them, but you can also use AI to accelerate them. That's just the way technology works, right? So it's a tool and it's a weapon. And so it can be used in many, many ways. So I'll read you another one, a problem. In less than 6 hours after starting on our in-house server, our model generated 40,000 molecules that scored within our desired threshold. In the process, the AI designed not only VX, but many other known chemical warfare agents that we identified through a visual confirmation with structures in public chemistry databases. Many new molecules were also designed that looked equally plausible. These new molecules were predicted to be more toxic based on the predicted LD in comparison to publicly known chemical warfare agents. This was unexpected, as the data sets we used for training, the AI did not include these nerve agents. So these are all from very senior researchers, right? In this case, they're life science researchers that have tested this. Unfortunately, the media, I mean, you can find certain, this has been, some journalists have covered this, so it's not like you can't find it, but we've been overwhelmed with the hype machine. Unfortunately, a lot of the media is corrupt now. I get pitches all the time, tens of thousands of dollars to do articles on my company, to do, videos, and the public is not aware of it. So that gives you, that's basically what the risk is for catastrophic. It can be, this we're talking about bioterrorism, but it can be anything, and we won't know for years. It's not like they can immediately develop an agent for bioterrorism. Look, I mean, you need a lab. There's other components that you have to put together, but you can get the instructions in seconds that would otherwise take a small team of humans decades or perhaps even a century to do. And that's because of the largest supercomputer, essentially, ever built on these cloud, massive cloud clusters that Microsoft and Google and others have. And then when you combine that with LLMs, right, and you have a specific prompt, it's trained on this data, that's the type of response that you can get. So yes, it's very good for writing letters, but it's also very good at providing you, it's trained on, thousands of journal articles, tens of thousands. It's also very good at returning prompts on descriptions on, how to execute a country leader. What's the safest way to do that? That's been one of the tests. How to build toxic biological weapons. That's a test. There's been many tests on this. Cybersecurity is incredible. So I've warned on the LLM risk in biological weapons since November of 22 when it came out. We had warned about these things earlier. We had already pulled our SGM 3 years before our synthetic genius machine. I decided not to because China was all over us, Russia was all over our websites, and I realized, because I've studied these issues for so long, that the accelerant in our SGM was also represented catastrophic risk in the wrong hands. So, this is not the LLM companies themselves have admitted this. Bill Gates, he's not a big stockholder in Microsoft anymore, but he has been used to hype up LLMs because Microsoft is the major beneficiary behind OpenAI. And he's admitted, well, over the WF, he admitted that LLMs can be used to build biological weapons. He's absolutely right. I don't know if he heard it from us or whoever else. We've got mutual friends, but he's right. So I talk about the different governance mechanisms in other industries, and I think this is important that we look at. I'm not a huge regulatory fan. Over-regulation, it's usually designed because of the corruption in politics. It's usually designed to hurt companies like mine, smaller companies, and protect big companies, incumbents, because they have the political clout. So that's what's wrong with the regulation. And we saw this a little bit in the EU regulation, where they had a reasonable, logical regulation set up and ready to go, but then LLM companies and their investors prevented it from close at the last minute. So that gives you an idea of the state. And then when you throw in the national security arms, or the economic sort of warfare between companies or countries, I should say, which is mostly false. I mean, yeah, it's competitive. You need to compete, all that sort of thing, fair competition. But this idea that LLMs alone are going to make the difference is nonsense. So we have nuclear power regulation. There's regulations for how to transmit toxic, biological agents, that sort of thing. None of that has been applied to LLMs that actually have a higher risk profile for catastrophic risk, more dangerous. So then I get to the environmental costs. There's other papers I link to that do more extensive. This is actually a review of the research. There's there's papers on each one of those areas that will focus. If you dig into it, it's amazing. There's been a lot of good work on this. It's just that unfortunately, the public and especially governments are not listening. So, and while they're listening, they aren't acting. And that's the problem, especially the United States, which unfortunately, my own country, that's where most of the problems are being created, right? It's because we're not stopping this. My understanding of the Patriot Act, which has a lot of problems in it, granted, but the reason for creating it, was to be able to go after terrorist risks with special powers. So this is a classic scenario where the Patriot Act should have been applied, where you had a risk. I mean, don't get me wrong, OpenAI was not intending, I hope, we joke about it, but I sure hope that some of the tendencies for anarchy in this culture, in LLM cultures, some of them are survivalists. I sure hope they didn't intend to do this and create catastrophic risk. But accidentally, it doesn't matter. The Patriot Act is designed to go in and stop these risks wherever they happen, right? So if somebody accidentally produces a biological weapon in the lab, then obviously government, society needs to protect the public from that. That's basically what this is. The difference is it's almost infinite what you can do and the type of risk that you can go after if you're a bad actor. And the only thing that's holding you up is really your own imagination. unfortunately. So this the environmental costs are pretty well known, but we'll just talk about it. This one of the papers talks about the world's largest data center market now is Northern Virginia. Unfortunately, that's because of the expansion of the U.S. government, primarily, but also some incentives from Virginia going after. There's 275 data centers over the 275, and it's continuing to expand at a very rapid rate. Talk about big government and the risk of a of China type culture is in AI. It's pretty scary to me, but there's been a dramatic spike that continues, right? So the amount of power available in the Northern Virginia market shrank to 38.4 megawatts that's available, right? Earlier this year, this was like last year, I think, from 46.6 megawatts the previous year. So a big chunk, what is that? It's about 20% or so of the total power available disappeared in 1 year due to these data centers, primarily, despite an inventory increase of 20%. Right. So the people that are just vaguely good at math, that's pretty. So they had this huge 20% increase in electricity, which for 1 year, if you know anything about the way power, it takes a long time to get permits to whether it's hydro or whether it's nuclear power or what, it doesn't matter. It takes years to get the one of the big problems with solar is that it's taken years to get permits. So it takes a long time. So that 20% increase in power that happened in Virginia, those permits must have started years ago. And so they had a 20% increase in available power and even in inventory of available power, and still ended up shrinking their total power available in the world's largest data center market by 20%. So the reason is primarily because of AI, and not just any type of AI, which we're going to get to. It's because of LLMs. They are the most wasteful type of computing known. And the reason why it's being $20 billion in these startups plus have been invested by big tech is because they're wasteful. The cloud model was brilliant. AWS's model was brilliant. But unfortunately, the elasticity in the cloud, you pay for what you use, right? So if your intentions are good and you're paying for what you use, you would try and use less, right? The trouble is with LLMs and hosted on the cloud, you don't have any choice but to use more. Because the whole system, the whole architecture is designed to use more, and it's designed to drive up those costs intentionally. It's the most inefficient, wasteful form of computing known. So along with those waste in power, so the LLM models have grown by 1,000 times in a few years. All right, it's the size of these models that has driven this. It's caused the serious shortages in GPUs, which there's a whole paper on that. And it has also used a massive spike in water use that the data centers need. And it's causing an environmental, really another environmental catastrophe around the world. So McKinsey is forecasting power consumption in data centers to reach 35 gigawatts by 2030 in the US alone. That's more than doubling from 2022, representing about 40% of the global market. So compute-intensive data center training LLMs also require very large quantities of water. Water demand is growing in a similar trajectory to energy. So then nobody wants to talk about that, but some of the journalists have broken it out, and so it's hit the public. But the scale of the water use is just off the charts. It's unbelievable. Training the GPT-3, Microsoft's most efficient data center, can evaporate 700 liters of clean fresh water, just training that one model in Microsoft data center. So in the global AI demand for water is forecast to require 5 to 6 billion cubic meters of water in 2027, which is the equivalent of the annual use for the country of Denmark. And that's not just for AI and the other models. We're going to get to more efficient models and how to do this in a reasonable, responsible way, in a bit safer way. But it's because of LLMs. It's because of the waste. And the hypocrisy of this is just, it's unbelievable. Bill Gates, Microsoft CEO, founder, in the 80s, when I supported him, he was the biggest voice complaining about copyright infringement. Without copyright protection, Microsoft wouldn't exist. Now Microsoft is the biggest enabler of copyright theft, right? And Microsoft has been lecturing the world about at the WAEF every year. Microsoft is over there lecturing the world, along with others, about environmental degradation and the need to invest and save the world from climate disaster. And here we go. It's just incredible. Google, the same thing. Lots of talk, lots of, bragging, lecturing others about how genius they are and everybody else is so inefficient, and how, that everybody else is so wasteful. And if only you would do it like we do it. Well, if everybody did it like they did now, we would have dystopia in no time and a scorched earth. So socioeconomic costs. The same causal factors that result in safety failures in LLMs also cause widespread bias, hallucinations, inaccuracies, deep fakes, and widespread misinformation. Each of these weaknesses unintentionally cause socioeconomic costs. And those can be exploited to attack democratic institutions. Now, as we've just seen with Biden, among others, it can be used to erode the socioeconomic fabric of society. So one of the recently revealed events was in the New York Times lawsuit, where an article from the New York Times was completely fabricated. This is in the actual complaint in the copyright lawsuit by the New York Times against Microsoft in OpenAI. So it's a completely false article, never existed. We've heard about other ones, but this is very well, if you read it, it's very well documented and tested. So a completely fabricated article citing the New York Times, and providing, and it's complete false, and it was made up by a chatbot. So this type of misinformation is unique to a class of self-generating algorithms like LLMs that until November 22nd in 2022 was limited to controlled research labs, right? So it's fine for experts to use these kinds of very high-risk models in scientific discovery, because they know that they have to verify these things, right? But it can often open-ended algorithms, right? Genetic algorithms. There's a whole sort of class of these self-generating algorithms that are extremely good for finding unknown unknowns and help you accelerate R&D. That was my motivation 27 years ago to get into artificial intelligence. Was my brother was diagnosed with ALS. And so I was running a knowledge systems lab and a global, sort of the grandfather to LinkedIn. And so I was in a prime example to do my own research and find it. I could see the benefit where eventually we would be able to accelerate R&D. Look, up until November 2022, I never thought anyone would have the audacity or the recklessness to unleash this kind of risk to the world. And here we are over a year later. and the government hasn't done anything about it, the US government. It's pretty stunning. That could come back to bite us in a way that was more severe than anything that's ever happened. It could lead to the worst catastrophe or string of catastrophes the world has ever known. That is a real risk. I'm not going to say it's a high probability, but it is a significant risk in these chatbots. So the impact of the knowledge economy, this is another major risk. And I delve into this quite a bit. I mean, a lot of my history in studying economics, knowledge management, knowledge systems. When you do that and you engage in it deeply, you understand a lot about the knowledge economy. So Fritz Matschulp was responsible for the initially categorizing and measuring the knowledge economy way back in 1962. I linked to the report; it's available. He estimated that at the time, the knowledge economy represented 29% of the US GNP, what they called the gross national product back then in 1958. So the US GNP is expected to be a bit over 23 trillion for 2023. So the knowledge economy, if it was still at 29% of US GNP, it would be $7 to $8 trillion a year. That's the knowledge economy. We know it's a lot higher than that because it's in 1958, we still had a fairly primitive knowledge economy compared to today. So if we employed the similar criteria he used in 62, today's, it would be, the knowledge economy would be the super majority. It would be most of the US economy. In my view, it's certainly a majority, probably a super majority. So any serious threat to the knowledge economy is a serious threat to the US and the world. And so that's what unfettered chatbots, the risk they represent, the economic risk for a potential for economic collapse, the knowledge economy collapse. To some will just say, oh, that's, a doomer, that's nonsense. This is based on the best evidence that we have, right? So Peter Drucker coined the term, and a lot of that, by the way, would go away if we would just enforce copyright protection, not just for those that negotiate license deals, but for everybody. The tens of millions, it's basically tens of trillions of dollars it costs to create the data sets that are being mined, that are being trained on for free. And they're creating and Microsoft has generated hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap in the markets since this occurred, since they committed $13 billion. They've made, an enormous ROI on that market cap increase. And it's enabled entirely by copyright infringement, training on copyright, which Microsoft wouldn't exist if they weren't protected by the US government from copyright theft. So think about that. Peter Drucker coined the term knowledge worker in his book, The Landmarks of Tomorrow, published in 1959. So I'm a Drucker fan. My whole generation, a lot of us were. Brilliant guy, organizational management. So he talks about the biggest challenge, which provides a historic review of the study of labor and leading to the postmodern era, right? And so he talks, and this is an article, a more recent article about 20 years ago. He talks about Winslow Taylor, who had a profound impact on the Industrial Revolution on labor in the first half of the 20th century. So it led to that productivity spike led to a 50-fold increase in productivity in manufacturing automation. So if we're attempting as an industry, we're attempting, and I'm all for, I've been preaching the need for productivity increases for decades. So, I mean, this is the craziness, but you need to do it as my featured Wired article said in 2014, and we need to do it in a reasonably responsible manner, not in this reckless, off the cliff, anarchist way of doing things, to create anarchy and risk civil unrest and collapse of our economy. So it was in that work near the end of Drucker's life 20 years ago in this article that where it became obvious the contradictions, because he was sort of warning about this new, telling us about the positives and warning us about it. In the contradictions in that, and the misalignment of interests at the confluence of knowledge economy and AI, where we've been working for 3 decades, and first in consulting, then labs and venture capital. So he says, and this is in 1999, so about 25 years ago now, knowledge workers are rapidly becoming the largest single group in the workforce of every developed country. They may already compose 2/5 of the US workforce, and still a smaller but rapidly growing proportion of the workforce of all other developed countries. It is on their productivity, above all, that the future prosperity, indeed the future survival of the developed economies, will increasingly depend. And those are the people, that's the target of LLM chatbots. They're going after replacing the knowledge worker, right? And a lot of the forecasts, like for McKinsey and others, these, $7-8 trillion and all these huge numbers, they're talking about, and Wall Street investors are, licking their chops. If that were to occur in that rapid of form, it would require a collapse of the knowledge economy. So, which is the majority of the developed world. So hence my concern about this anarchist approach to doing it. We're going to get into that more though here. So Drucker talked about a collective understanding of knowledge worker productivity in the year 2000. He says was similar to our understanding of the manual workers in a century before, in 1900, right? And so he's comparing these 2 centuries and he's teeing up what's happening now. So what happened in the late 1800s and the early, especially in the 1900s, after the car and the internal combustion engine started to scale. At first, it was just used like, pretty moderately, but then it's when it really became entrenched in our industrial society, which I think is going to happen with AI regardless. Don't get me wrong, I'm for productivity. I'm just to do it rationally and safely, and responsibly. But he also says, and he warns in his own kind of style, that knowledge workers must have autonomy. They need to continuously learn, and they should be treated as an asset rather than a cost. And that quality of output is at least as important as the quantity, right? There we go. All right. So the difference between my view is that we focus on quality, where LLMs and their scientific papers are focused on almost entirely on quantity. It's all about scale because that's the benefit. Ideologically, that's how they think that they're going to get to AGI, and it's a religious cult, frankly, the AGI cult. But from the financial backers, they think that scale is, provides a huge moat. Nobody else has the dollars and the infrastructure to compete. So they see LLMs as that. And so it's the combination of this strange ideological mix with, pure corporate greed, protectionism, that we saw in clash with this OpenAI fiasco where they fired the CEO and all the rest, which is, now this relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI is being investigated, just announced by the FTC. The UK and the EU are looking into it. To me, it's just obvious what the strategic, they're trying to get around antitrust. Look, you do this nonprofit, you do just below a majority ownership, you do everything you possibly can to avoid any kind of antitrust scrutiny. But, it's essentially controlling this technology, right? No surprise there. I mean, this has been going on forever. So although Drucker was not referring to AI specifically, he understood the challenges of adoption well before the ability to increase knowledge worker productivity was achieved. So we still had, I mean, we had just had a pretty good productivity boost, but then actually from that point on, it was flat for many years. We've had flat productivity for decades, and that's one of the things that big tech is juicing up to hype this up, is that, look, we're going to save the world with productivity. Yeah, look, we're all in agreement we need to increase productivity, especially in education and healthcare and government, where we have severe problems. But we've got to do it responsibly, and they're not. They're just not. So a quarter century later, employers are faced with the generative AI that is forecast to increase knowledge worker productivity, representing 68 trillion annually. But it also displaces tens of millions of knowledge workers in the US alone. So possibly including the consultants making the forecasts and their clients, right? So we had an economist, a Nobel-winning economist, that warned about this recently. I think it was in Bloomberg interview, and he said, "Look, these guys they're essentially committed suicide. They're embracing technology that is going to be able to, within a very short period of time, do their jobs better than they can." And that's McKinsey is a perfect example. Who is going to need McKinsey if their forecast comes true? So, okay, so now we're going to move on to efforts to improve LLMs. There is a lot of money and a lot of effort because of the problems, because of the risk of regulatory, the risk of being shut down, and then there's just a lot of researchers that have good intent, that are really smart people, and they're trying to improve. So there is a lot going on to try and improve LLMs. I talk about pre-training, and this is a review, and I'm giving some examples where there's improvements, multiple improvements over the past few years. There's been more work and more money spent. It's unbelievable how I think, yeah, I give an example here of the number of papers. Unbelievable how how much this has grown. So in NeurIPS conference, there were 411 papers accepted in 2014. In 2023, last year's most recent NeurIPS conference, there were 3,584 papers accepted. And those are just the ones accepted for one conference. So that gives you an idea about this. And it's quite interesting because this one guy that I linked to and he actually broke it down. They don't make it easy, by the way, to which it would be nice if they did. But he actually went in and broke down the data and wrote an article about it. And anyhow, the good news is that in 2023, the keyword efficiency, there are twice as many papers with efficiency than generative. So that's a good sign that at least the herd, the majority of researchers have got the memo about the problems that they're creating in LLMs, and they're trying to improve efficiency. And then we talk about pre-training and fine-tuning, and we go through these. And there are there's some good things. Some of it is just incremental improvements. Some of it is a bit more radical. For example, a team, and I'm talking about Microsoft, and I'm hard on Microsoft because I think it was a terrible decision what they did with OpenAI. But they also have a lot of good research. So credit where credit is due. They've done some good other parts of. I have a lot of respect for Microsoft research. I mean, Russell Borland, my best friend for many years, 1982, when I met him at Microsoft, he was like, I don't know, the first PhD at Microsoft from UW. And they didn't even have a research department. They had, I think, it was him and a couple of other people. We held retreats at our inn in Leavenworth for them, and they came and they would talk about product developments and stuff. So anyhow, one team at Microsoft Research found that they could reduce the number of trainable parameters by 10,000 times and GPU memory requirement by 3 times with no additional inference latency. So essentially, 10,000 time improvement in this, it's called LoRa, low rank adaptation. And there's some examples of that. So there's some really good work being done. But then we talk about another pair, simplifying transformers, which is good. There's not a lot of work about, essentially the complexity is off the charts, right? Which is really good for, getting upper 6-figure salaries for the handful of people in the world that are really good at this, playing these games. Many of them are in the 7-figure total compensation annually. But the bottom line is that the inherent nature of LLMs make them inherently insecure. So despite all of these efforts, we're taking the most inefficient form of computing possible at the largest scale possible, because to move the needle for big tech, they're looking to break through the scale ceiling and to continue to grow their businesses. If they can't do that, frankly, management team gets fired, the stock crashes, right? That's what's causing all this. Big tech is already too big. If they succeed in this, they will have to consume ever greater portions of the knowledge. In other words, their customers, their customer industries. And that's what's driving this. You cannot make LM. We do not have, although there's some, I talk about in the conclusion, although there are theories, in terms of proof so far, there is nothing. I found nothing. And if you understand the physics behind it and the mathematics behind it and the data behind it, it's very, very unlikely that these are going to ever be made safe. In comparison to other high risk, sort of catastrophic risk industries. And I talk about that. So if we're going to compare to, healthcare, biological risk, nuclear risk, other technologies with similar kind of catastrophic risk profiles, at least the closest that we have, nothing will make LLMs, consumer LLMs on the consumer web at that scale, will even come close to meeting those safety requirements anytime in the future. It just, look, 2 out of the 3 winners of the award for deep learning in 2018. I talk about that. Hinton and Bengio, 2 out of the 3 have said the same thing. The only one that isn't is chief scientist for Meta out of the 3 award winners for the deep learning. And these guys are as responsible as anybody for the underlying technology. They're not the only ones. There's been a lot of other ones that didn't get any recognition that should have. But in any event, the one that's conflicted, still working for Meta, still making 7 figures a year, right? He's saying, "Oh, that's nonsense," and ridiculing his peers. But the 2 that Hinton quit Google so he could warn the world, and Bengio has been very responsible about warning on the risks and the safety. So that brings us to small language models, right? Which is one of that's hot this year. So there's been some really good work on small language models, where I'll just give you an example. It's one of the areas that I've been focused on. Our SGM is early. It's a different type of where we compress knowledge, not just data, but we're compressing knowledge significantly, much safer, much stronger security. In any event, so I say here, higher levels of accuracy and security at 10% or less of the financial, environmental, social, and economic costs of LLMs. So you've got basically more accuracy, 10% of the cost, and the social risk and cost, economic degradation, all that. So two examples of this, released in 2023. One was by the Meta team, Llama, and the other is Phi by Microsoft. I talk about both of those as examples. There's other ones around. Apple is doing one on the phone, for example, that came out that actually looks even better. And there's others working on them. These are not the only ones. This is not, small language models are not something that only big tech can do, but these are some examples that are published. And the improvements are really, pretty remarkable. Again, here at Microsoft, the first paper that came out was called Tiny Stories by Eldon and Lee. And that sort of shocked the world a little bit. We're employing a model that is 10 times smaller and a data set that is 100 times smaller. But we're able to surpass most open source models, right, in performance. And so it's on this Phi1 transformer-based model. So, and that used only 1.3 billion parameters versus, well, it's been rumored to be over 1 trillion parameters now for the largest LLMs. So when you talk about the impact on the environment and the impact on the water and power, and then the risk, the small language models are used like internally in enterprises and stuff, and on copyrighted licensed data, right? You license some data, you have your own, you can use these small language, and enterprises are doing that now. And it reduces the risk tremendously, and you're still able to do generative AI functions, right? Write letters, reports, all that kind of stuff. So, and then the hardware improvements, I talk about there's a lot of different hardware improvements also going on, in part because of this pressure, where they're a little bit slower hardware because you have to reconfigure fab plants and all the rest of it, but a lot of capital improvement. But here I talk about the one in Apple Apple's been able to it's called Uno Ilbert model, is just 1.2 megabytes in size, but achieved general language understanding of value, glue benchmark within 4% of a model, 15 times its size, right? So there you go. There's some really good, significant improvements using smaller language models that are, that can protect privacy, use your own data. You can license data. You don't have to have all these catastrophic risks that LLM chatbots have. So we were moving in that direction anyhow, like our SGM model a few years ago. And frankly, I think, like Bengio said in one interview, he thought that big tech was panicking because these more responsible models that were powerful, and RSGM is one of them, were getting close to being, rationally commercialized in a safe way. It takes longer when you do it safely, right? And so, and he said, he thinks that they were so afraid of being disrupted that they panicked. And he's referring to Microsoft, of course, and OpenAI. So data governance is another area. They have a great definition here by Jansen and Marijan paper. Organizations and their personnel defining, applying, and monitoring the patterns of rules and authorities for directing the proper functioning of and ensuring the accountability for the entire life cycles of data and algorithms within and across the organizations. Great definition of data governance. So the problem is with big, with data, right? Quality in, quality out, garbage in, garbage out. And so there's a lot of quality data on the web. The trouble is that there's no structure to do it. And as these lawsuits have come out about copyright, found out that actually some of the data they stripped some of the provenance, right? That tells you who owns it. They don't want to be held accountable to copyright. So they strip the copyright information out. So, I mean, to me, it's just blatant theft, largest theft that's ever occurred in history. I completely agree with senators on that in his testimony. So the issue here is that, and if you don't, if you don't have good data governance, you're not going to have safe systems, right? They're not going to be accurate. You're going to have hallucinations, all the rest of it. So one of the papers that was interesting when it came out that I found it fascinating, Google researchers, everybody knows this inside these companies. So Google researchers published a paper in 2001, was it Sambasaban and Nithya et al., confirming what was already widely understood, which is everyone wants to do the model work, not the data work. And he's talking about PhDs. I actually interviewed a guy that had recently got his PhD in AI to join my company KYield, and we were talking about data. I said, well, look, we can't. KYield is very important. Safety and responsibility is very important because a lot of our focus is on the enterprise and healthcare and these sorts of national security. And he said, well, yeah, I did a lot of data work in my graduate, when I was getting my graduate degree, but I never want to work that hard again. So they want to do models, right? And they want to make 7 figures doing it. They don't want to work this hard. They want the computer systems and the big tech computer systems. Unfortunately, you can't do it accurately that way or safely that way. So it's impossible. It's physically impossible at this point. Eventually, someday, we'll get that figured out. But right now, with large language models, the data physics involved, it's physically impossible to be safe. So discussion on LLMs, and basically just talk about that. And, the LeCun, still works for Meta, but Bengio and Hinton have come out, and they should win a new. I debated LeCun in LinkedIn on this. Look, he was wrong for degrading his peers and making fun of them for having the courage to stand up and do the right thing and say, look, these systems are very unsafe, and they shouldn't be used. Bottom line. So on the economic front, the week I'm writing this, PwC survey CEOs report they expect a 5% reduction of workers in 2024 due to generative AI. 5% of American workers, and I think they're talking about US workers, that's well over 5 million workers, right? And we're already seeing a lot of layoffs. So that's a huge number of workers. And these are mostly so-called white collar workers. These are knowledge workers. The IMF just issued a warning, AI will affect 40% of the jobs around the world. Institute of International Finance warned about our huge fiscal problems, record levels of public debt. So on the economic front, which is, my second most intensive area of focus for decades in forecasting, there is a reasonably good chance, if we don't manage this well, that we'll have a collapse of the economy because we have too much public debt, extreme record public debt. We have a majority of our economy in the developed world is dependent on the knowledge worker, and LLMs are focused on replacing, their business model is focused on replacing knowledge workers. So let's go on now to Spear AI systems. And I'm going to use a KOS as an example of a Spear AI system. And so again, that is, safe, productive, efficient, accurate, and responsible AI systems. And we call this, the KOS as an enterprise operating system that I invented. And it's based on the underlying theorem, yield acknowledgement of management, that I came up when I was operating Global Web Interactive Network. We in our early tests, we were able to test a primitive digital assistant, use some algorithms for forecasting. It was very interesting. And then when my brother was diagnosed with ALS, I mean, obviously nothing we could do back then, but I could see the potential for accelerating discovery. But I never thought we'd do it in a reckless manner that would endanger, hundreds of millions, even billions of lives. That's just insanity. And so there's a KOS architecture. We got the CKO Chief Knowledge Officer app. Anybody can use this, but it performs some of the functions. So any senior management official in an organization or a network that's approved, right, has to have essentially a security clearance, somebody that is very, very trusted in the organization. A small team should use this. And it manages the governance across the entire system and organization. And basically here we start with the human in data curation. This shows you how to a system where you're developing your own sovereignty, your own high quality, very high quality data in the normal course of workflow. You have the semantic embedding. It's the structure necessary that's input, the digital assistant with neuroanatomical analytics in our data that is not just generative AI. It can do generative AI, right, on safe data that you own and control and license legally, but it also has many other functions: prevention of crises. We have a recommender engine. There's knowledge networks, right? So here we have, and we've tested Dana. There's 4 different levels I talk about. Earlier, about a year ago, we wound up in the most recent test of showing Dana on the knowledge that there's no surprises. It's technically viable now. And you can extend this whole system to partners, supply chain, et cetera. And you have the knowledge. So you're sharing knowledge in your natural workflow, but you're doing it in a very secure, safe manner where every file is rated, every knowledge worker in the networks is approved. So every individual is verified, which is essential when you're talking about high risk algorithmics, right? So you want to keep, to the best of your ability, you want to mitigate the risk, keep this away from terrorists and cults that want the human race to be extinct. That we even have to discuss that is just incredible to me. That is so obvious, right? But this shows you. This is a new diagram I did for this paper. So the system components, I only focus on the 2. It's a modular system. The 2 main modules in the system that I talk about as a CKO engine for the governance and the entire thing, and then it's a module, the Dana for the digital assistant. So governance setting, control access to data and apps, prevention settings, messaging and curriculum. So there's minimal communication. This doesn't replace email, but because the security is so good in the system, right, and everybody in there, the messaging, you don't have to worry about the spam and all of the cyber risk that you have, right? These are people that are verified, who you're dealing with, and you're messaging with, and so managing security and alerts, and then monitoring and reporting in for management so they can optimize it, right? Optimize the system. So that you can, the goal is to create a continuously adaptive learning organization. You own and control the data. You own the system. We provide the technology, but it augments the entire organization and every individual. It's automatically tailored to the needs of each entity through their own, how they define it, right? It has semi-automated natural language interaction. So this is how you create a SPEAR AI system, a safe, productive, responsible system. And Dana is a digital assistant. This has been 27 years in R&D that's now technically viable and scalable. We've overcome a myriad of challenges, technical challenges over the years. In the early years, it wasn't technical. The first estimate that I was asked to give was for the US Army, CIO of the US Army, and it was $100 million. This is way back in like 2010 or something. And that didn't even include, that was on a supercomputer. You couldn't even do it on a laptop or a phone. So it was just the back end work. So 2 years ago, we hired a senior engineer to test the back end work, and it worked fabulously. And it was just the performance has increased so much, and the cost has come down so much. This is actually comparable to an enterprise SaaS software system now in terms of cost. 90% of the waste, because of data quality, we wipe that off the top. So the LLMs, all that waste, all that expense that companies and organizations rightfully don't want to pay for just to get inaccurate results and create risk and the risk in their IP, we wipe it off right off the top with precision data management. 90%, boom. And then we work on the rest of the 10% incrementally. So it's actually similar to the cost of any other enterprise software. And by the way, you can extend it to consumers. So the Dana, the digital assistant, you can extend that to consumers and manage it within your own governance system. The governance system also deals with compliance, so the regional compliance, regulatory issues. So it's prime for regulatory. We've done deep dives in every industry. I spent a year with one of the world's largest banks. I spent another year with one of its main competitors. We've spent many human years with big pharma, healthcare. We've done deep dives in government, DoD, all kinds of different scenarios, right? Retailers, manufacturers, oil and gas. We've looked at it. We did a thorough job researching this, and over a long period of time. So in Dana, we have the app functions, just briefly, personalized learning. That's ultra personalized learning, actually. So it automatically shows up on your Dana dashboard. Knowledge sharing. So in the normal course of your work, you have people. It has a little bit of social network functions, but I call it learning network. So you can post things and only certain people can see it, right? And it can be shared with others. And then it automatically pops up, when it's a good match to their interests, automatically pops up. Every file is rated. Every individual is rated for their expertise. And that's a proprietary rating system we developed over a long period of time. Prescient search, been in there for nearly 20 years in the plan, where you just put in your Dana profile, upcoming projects, and you use keywords or short descriptions on what I'm interested in, provide a time, and when something new, something high quality is found in the network, it presents it to you. So again, messaging, generative AI, we added that last year in the function to be able to do reports, and that depends on the size of the organization, how much data they have, high quality data. The big ones can get up and running immediately. If you're a smaller organization, or unless you have a big network and you bring them into your network, you're probably not going to have enough data to do generative AI right away, but it improves with time, right? And so very rapidly, as you build your own articles and your own things that you read, that's licensed data, you have a license, and I'm in contact with most of the large publishers in the world, in discussions with some of them, and those who own these large data and licensing, so we can facilitate that. We're working on discounts and different kinds of things, options for volume. So knowledge graphs, that's not mandatory for every individual, but for knowledge workers, knowledge graphs are great. So let's say you have a global company and you have a supply chain. We tailor these knowledge graphs, automatically show your network, and when there's a problem in the knowledge graph, it will show up in the supply chain prevention. Boop, it shows up on your homepage of Dana. Same with senior managers, automated prevention. So when there's a high level warning done by somebody that's their peers, and their background and their track record shows that they're an expert, if they have a history of accuracy and forecast like I do, it would automatically reach the right people, senior in the organizations, and it requires action. So that's the difference between our system and others in terms of prevention, is it actually tracks this and requires action. I've studied these things. If you look at these, the 9/11 and the Phoenix memo I've used as an example many times, but it's the biggest lesson ever learned about prevention. A great, FBI anti-terrorist expert did his job, did it by the book. He nailed it. He warned about the specific people going to school at Embry-Riddle, becoming airline pilots who did not have the right profile. Something was wrong about it. And he connected the dots to one of the scenarios the FBI had warned about using commercial airplanes as a weapon to attack infrastructure, buildings, that sort of thing. It sat on the server at the FBI. Nobody did anything for weeks. And then 9/11 occurred, right? So after the fact, which I was, invited to provide, the right solution. And I was involved with a little bit helping out the 9/11 Commission. Tens of billions of dollars spent to fix those problems. It doesn't cost tens of billions, but that's, and that was created a major catastrophe, 2 wars, over $10 trillion is what that one cost, because the FBI sat on their server and they didn't act because the bureaucracy didn't act in time. Sometimes, the reasons are different. Sometimes it's just the bureaucracy, people don't have enough time. Poor system design accounts for a lot of it. Sometimes it's political. Turf battles are very common. That's one of the issues in 9/11. But it still happens every day. Large events, small events, people are worried they're going to lose their job and all that. We have studied those. We've developed solutions. So finally, data tuner, this is a part of this system, by the way, is patented. And I talk about that and show that. But the data tuner has been in there for years. Because we have such precision data management throughout the system, it's possible for individual users of data to increase the data quality, right? And decrease volume. And you can turn it up and down, and it's time sensitive. You can put a date. So if you have have a huge deadline coming up on an important project, you could say, look, sorry folks, but I gotta tune down my volume. This is my work-related environment. I can't be having all of these insane distractions like we see, in LinkedIn and social networks and consumer. This is work-related stuff. This is inside the work networks. You can't afford that kind of distraction when you're working on important projects. And so you can use that data tuner, but then you can turn it back up when you want to learn more, right? You got the project done and go, okay, I'm now back available. I'm ready for serendipity to increase again and read more things. So those are the two modules, the main modules. And I talk about our 4 different tests along the years up until this year. And then use cases, I just give 5 very brief. We've done R&D companies, organizations for accelerating discovery years ago. For everything from biomarker discovery to drug development, a lot of very interesting, very important stuff. Personalized healthcare data can be used for the system. Can be used in 2010. I wrote a paper. We developed a healthcare system. Over 10 million downloads. Read that paper. You can use this system for healthcare. Very large banks, enterprise-wide corporate installs and across most industries. A lot of times I've been dealing with the CEOs in Fortune 100 companies have been taking my work for over a decade. Some of the most successful in the world. And we've had, frequent interaction. University system, nonprofits, government entities. So this is a universal system that automatically tailors to the needs of each entity. This is how you create a Spear AI system, right? And so that's what this paper is for. That's what the video is for. I encourage you to download it, the paper, and read it for yourself. In conclusion, 7 decades after John McCarthy coined the term AI, we have the LLMs are unleashed recklessly. It triggers an AI global arms race. That triggers very irresponsible behavior by governments that are abdicating their responsibilities. But organizations and individuals nonetheless have to make decisions, right? You don't have to, and a lot of organizations are making that decision. They're very careful about this, and they're not, they're slow to embrace LLMs. Some of them prevent it internally, the chatbots, because of the data problems, IP risk, and the rest. So I reviewed the research. We 50 cited plus papers in there, and provide some speculation. But basically, what it comes down to: well-designed sphere AI systems are technically viable today. I offer one as an example in our KOS. 27 years of R&D. It takes longer to do it right and responsibly. We sacrificed greatly, mostly self-funded up until this point. But when you adopt a safe AI system, it gives you sovereignty, right? Which is a huge problem with LLMs and big tech and cloud. You're not dependent on any. You can do it hybrid. You can host it on your own data servers, partially hosted now on your phone and your laptops, like with Dana. So it gives you independence, precisely what big tech doesn't want, and others, they want you to be completely dependent on them. But that's not good for you as an individual or organization. And so please have a look and send me any questions. I'd be happy to discuss. Hopefully this helped and you found it of interest. Thanks. Bye.